Hello guys, welcome to today's episode. Today we're going to be covering the following topics. All the timestamps are in the description below. Please make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the latest videos I publish. So let's get started with today's episode. What's the difference between a procedure and a function, especially in PowerShell? So in other languages, you may have a more formal keywords or definitions of what a function is, what a procedure is. In PowerShell, this is how you differentiate. So a function here, as you can see, get square takes in a parameter and then multiplies that parameter by itself and then does a return. This return statement returns a value. So you can see here, when we say get square 5, what I will do if I run this, if I click on run selection and then write the output here and again click run selection, and you can see here that we've got the value 25. So here the function is returning a value, but a procedure. So PowerShell doesn't really have a procedure or proc or sub or any of that. It doesn't even have the word void to indicate it's the procedure. Instead, it just declares the function, show greeting, for example, takes in a parameter and then writes the output. But notice there is no return statement here, or there is no value being passed implicitly. The return statement is needed when you need to be explicit, but PowerShell is able to pass values without the return statement. So I'll show you that as well. So if I delete this over here and if I run this again, it will still pass the value 25 back. So if I run this, and as you can see, we still got 25 back. With a procedure, if I run this, we've got the output here. So the difference between a procedure in PowerShell and a function is a function returns a value with or without the return keyword. So it can be like this, or it can be like this, or it will just simply do the relevant action. So this time we're just writing out to the host a greeting, and that greeting is basically shown. So this procedure is called show greeting, and we just execute that. It doesn't actually pass any values back. So that's the important difference between function in PowerShell and a procedure. Notice that it doesn't actually have the word procedure or anything to indicate it's a procedure, other than you just have to look at the code and see if it returns a value. Whereas in other languages, you may have more formal keywords or ways to identify, such as in C#, the void keyword is used to identify a procedure as such, but a function usually returns a value object or a data type. In PowerShell, when you declare a function, you do not need to specify a return keyword. So here you can see this function multiplies the input parameter by 2, and you do not need a return keyword. This return here happens implicitly. It's done automatically because PowerShell is a pipeline-based scripting language. So that means it automatically transfers the final output from a function to the next object or function. But you can explicitly do it like this. So here you can see I am now multiplying it by 2, but notice that the return keyword actually returns the control back to the original program. So if I just run this, so if I go here and run selection, and that's now in memory, and if I run this and again do run selection, and you can see we've got the output 8. So if I've got this function now with the return keyword, I run the whole thing. So if I go here and click run selection again, and you can see that I've got the same output as before. So the return keyword doesn't really make any difference. But where it does make a difference is when you have a function like this, where you are writing something to the host just to test it, and you're doing some more work after the return keyword. What do you think will happen? So when you do this, this line will get executed, but anything after the return keyword, it will not get executed. So if I run this here and do run selection, and as you can see here, it did write the before part, but it didn't write the after part. So this shows that return keyword just passes the control back to the main thread, and this never gets executed. So just watch out around the return keyword. You don't have to use it. It does make sense to use it, so you're quite clear in terms of what you're returning. But if you're using it, make sure you're not doing any further processing after the return keyword. Otherwise, it will never get executed. In PowerShell, you can create a predicate. A predicate basically returns true or false. So here you can see we're creating a script block, or what you might call anonymous function in other languages. So here, this takes in a parameter of x. It then tries to work out if there's a remainder. If there is no remainder, then basically that's an even number. This will basically return true or false, and that's what's known as a predicate. So if I run this code here, and if I do run selection, and as you can see here, we've got true and false. So here we have a bunch of numbers, and we've got the same predicate, but notice this no longer takes in a parameter. Instead, it's a $_. And as you know, with $_, PowerShell uses this as the pipeline parameter. So when you put stuff in pipeline like this, it automatically gets the variable $_. So here, when you got these numbers one by one, that is transferred to this variable through the pipeline. So when you call this commandlet where object, which in turn calls this anonymous function script block that we have here, this will automatically receive the pipeline variable $_, and it will then work out if that number out of this list here is even or odd, and it will return true or false. So this will return true or false, and it'll give you even numbers. So if I run this here, and as you can see, we have 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Those are the even even numbers between 1 and 10. So the question is, why not use this syntax? The reason you cannot use this syntax is when using the pipeline operator, it doesn't pass values and parameters like that. It always passes using the $_. So your question might be, what if I change this parameter to $_? Will that work? Not necessarily, because the way this function is structured is different. So I've got the same example down here, as you can see, but you can do it like this. So you can put your script block here. Notice how the syntax is different. Over here, it's haven't got the script block. So here, you're actually converting and calling that function. Notice the call operator, and you're calling is even with the $ variable passed by the pipeline, and that in turn gets passed here, and then it works out if it is even. So that's one way to do it, but the preferred way to do it is by actually declaring the script block like this rather than like this. So this allows you to reuse this function, whereas the script block over here is intended for pipeline use. So that's the main difference. This one is intended for pipeline use. This one is intended for generic use. But notice you just have to do a bit more work here if you want to use this function here. So I hope this makes sense. And if I run this again, you can see that this works same way as before. You still get the even numbers output here. So yes, this is how you can use predicates, something that returns true or false in your code in PowerShell. In PowerShell, everything is an object. So unlike Bash, which pipes text, so you have the concept of fields. So for example, here we're trying to filter these files, and we're filtering them by the first field here. And then we're sorting them by the first field here as well. And then we are selecting the top 5. In PowerShell, because you have rich objects, and what I mean by rich objects is, like in programming languages, you can access the properties and methods. So here, PowerShell will actually let you select properties such as length of the file, so that's the size of the file, and then sort that by descending, ascending, just as you can do with Bash. But notice the properties are named because they're rich objects, and then these objects get piped to the next pipeline. So that's the difference between PowerShell and Bash. And if I run this code here, so you can see that we've got the output like this. So in summary, each item passed in the pipeline in PowerShell is a full .NET object with properties and methods. That's why you can do things like this and name the properties. So you can actually get all the properties and methods. So if I do this here, you can see these are the different methods, but you can also access settings such as replace, open write, and so on in PowerShell. So this just makes it easier. So just think of these pipelines receiving a full .NET object that will actually have properties and methods that you can use in PowerShell. Whereas in Bash, which pipes text, PowerShell pipes rich .NET objects. In PowerShell, you can create a for loop to loop through numbers. So here, I've got a loop that basically goes through the numbers up to 5. This is the starting point. So notice the variable name. So this is the variable $i. The $sign is needed as an indicator to say this is variable. Then what we're doing is this variable must be less than or equal to 5 in order for this loop to continue. So this is the condition that you define. And this is the counter update. So this is where you increase this counter here by 1. So here you will then get the output. So if I highlight this code and then do run selection, and you can see we got the output 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. But PowerShell has the for each loop. So if you don't know how many elements there are, so we know here that we have to go through this 5 times, but if you don't know how many elements there are, so in this case, I'm creating an array. This syntax is to create an array, and I'm putting in these fruits in here. What we want to do is loop through those fruits. So for each is loop type. So you just declare for each keyword, and then in the parentheses, you say fruit in fruits. So fruits here is the variable name here, and this is something that's created as part of this loop, and this variable can be used within the loop itself. So here you're declaring $fruit, and that $fruit can be accessed here. So if I run this again, and you can see that all the fruits are printed here. So use the for loop if you want to use a counter and you know how many elements there are. But if you don't know how many elements there are, you can use for each. For each will exhaust and go through every single element until no other elements are found. So this is useful when you don't know the number of items. This is useful when you do know the number of items. It's very important to understand the difference between a while loop and a do while loop. A while loop will execute as long as this condition is true, while a do while loop will execute at least once. So let's take a look at why that is. So here we're declaring a variable called count. $count. $sign is to indicate a variable name in PowerShell, and count is the variable name. So here we are assigning it value of 1. Then we've got the while keyword, and notice the condition. So this condition is checking if the value of the count is less than or equal to 3. If it is true, this line will execute, and then we will increase the counter. So here count is being increased by 1. But the difference between the do while, notice the keyword do here, and the difference between the syntax. So here we had the while. Notice the while here in this one, in the do while, have been moved further down. It's the same condition essentially. So we're just checking if count is less than or equal to 3. Count is declared up here at the variable and used within here. So it will write out this line once, then increase the counter, then move to check the condition. So I'll demonstrate this to you. So if I run the first one and if I run selection on here, so you can see here that it increased the count is 1 the very first time it came, 2 and 3. But what if I make this 3? Or actually, let's make it 4. So if I make this 4 and run this, you can see that condition never executed. You can see it never executed executed any of the numbers. If I run this one, which is a do while loop, I run selection again, and you can see here we could count 1, 2, 3. But if I change this to 4, what do you think will happen? Well, it will come down here because there's no condition. The while condition is at the end. This will run and print 4 over here. So if I run this and run selection again, and you can see it had printed the line, this is a do while loop, count is 4. So that's an important difference to understand between a while loop and a do while loop. Do while will execute at least once because there is no condition at the beginning. The condition is at the end, while a while loop will continue to execute as long as the condition is true, and it will not execute if this condition is false. So it may not run even once, but this one will run at least once. So depending on what you're trying to do, make sure you use the correct syntax and the correct version of the while and do while loop. And the naming difference between them is this one is just called do while and this one is just called the while loop. It's important to understand the difference between a while loop here and until loop. Now this is do while and do until. So the syntax pretty much looks the same. So you can see that the variable declared here, then you've got the curly braces here which contain the logic of the loop, and then you've got a condition here. So the condition here, keyword while is used here and keyword until is used here. So notice that the condition looks pretty much the same other than one is greater than and the other one is less than. So this loop will run as long as this condition is true, which is the counter is less than or equal to 3. And this one is saying slightly different thing, which is as soon as this count is greater than 3, then don't run this loop. So it's just the way you think in your head how this works. So until something happens versus while something is going on. So while you are connected to the internet, you could get it to do a certain thing. So while internet connection is true, or which is until you connect to the internet, I am going to display a message to say, please connect to the internet. So it's just a different way of thinking, to be honest with you. You can use either because you could convert this into a not condition. So you could put this in braces here, and then you can add the keyword not, and then that would basically reverse the condition. So it doesn't really matter which one you use. You just need to be aware that they pretty much do the same thing. You just need to understand there'll be slight difference in the condition. But one important thing to remember is both of these will execute at least once. So even if you have this condition here, so if I remove this over here, so if I change this to a 4, for example, and run this, notice that it still executes it. So both of these loops will execute at least once. So even if I do this to a 5, then you can see it still runs here. So both of these will run once. Only difference is the keyword until versus while, and then slight change in the condition. It is very important to understand the if statement in PowerShell. Although it looks very simple, it is important to understand some critical rules. So here I have a variable called score with this value. You start off with the word if, and then you define your condition in these parentheses. So here, notice we're not using double equal sign or greater than or equal to sign. Instead, we're using -GE. The letters GE mean greater than or equal to. So this is different to JavaScript, C#, where they use symbols, but it is .NET related syntax. You have to include the dash for these letters. Notice the logical AND also has a dash, and the less than or equal to symbol also has a dash. So here we're checking if the score is greater than or equal to 80 and score is less than or equal to 100. Then within these curly braces, you put any code that you want. So if I highlight this and run this code using run selection, and you can see the output here, which is it's a grade A. You can enhance the if statement further. So here, notice that we've got else if. So this is another condition. So if the first condition is not met, it will try and action this condition. And there is also an else part. If nothing is met above, then it will execute this. Notice the else one doesn't have a condition. So this part is missing from the else, and this else if only have the word else. Otherwise, it's similar to if over here. Again, notice that we're using -EQ for equals, and we're not using symbols like this to say it's equal because this won't work in PowerShell. So this symbol here must be the letters -L key for less than 18. So if I highlight this code here and run selection, and you can see here the output that's been printed, which is you are an adult because the age is 20. So the first condition here is not met. This condition equal to 18 has not met. So instead it has executed this condition here to say you are an adult. So although very simple if statements, it's important to understand the differences in PowerShell as pointed out that you can't use symbols. Instead, you must use these letters, and notice the logical operator as well, which is -and note the symbols like this. So you cannot use these here in PowerShell. Instead, you must use -and. So I hope this makes sense and you understand if statements in PowerShell. PowerShell does have a switch statement. So here I've got a variable called fruit, and then I've got the various cases here. So if it is apple, I want it to print it's an apple. Banana, it's a banana, or default, which is unknown fruit. The syntax is pretty much like C#, but notice there is no break keyword needed. There is no case keyword needed too at the beginning of each case. So the default keyword works as there is. You don't need colon to break a logic that should happen after a case is matched. Then this script block is executed. Here, if If you don't know what a script block is, watch one of my other videos. So if I highlight this and run this, if I do run selection here, and this is the output that we get here. So this is very useful when you want to match one case at a time and only execute that specific line of code or any other conditional code that you may have. But you should use the if statement for more complex scenarios. So switch is very useful and easy to use. And remember the default case if you don't get any matches here. Did you know that in PowerShell, you can use the wildcard parameter with the switch statement? This is very hard to do in other languages or a bit more complicated syntax. But here, as you can see, it's very simple. You just add the keyword switch, and that's your switch statement, and then you add the parameter wildcard. And then here, as you can see, I'm looking for where one character can be anything. So it can be like car, or cur, but here you can use an asterisk to look for multiple characters. So anything that starts with CA. The question mark is exactly one character, while the asterisk means 0 or more characters. So if I run this, I like that, and then click on run selection. And as you can see, starts with CA because our value was car. So yeah, PowerShell is really powerful in terms of using wildcard here, and it's very simple syntax. You just use this wildcard parameter with the switch statement, and then your case statements can actually be wildcards rather than fixed values. And this would be very hard to do in other languages. For example, in C#, the syntax would be much more complex. But in PowerShell, as you can see, it is very easy on the eyes. A hidden feature of the switch statement in PowerShell is that you can use parameters. So here, switch statement here have the parameter of wildcard. This means you can use wildcards like this as the case values to search for. But you can also include other parameters such as case sensitive, because by default, it is not case sensitive. So here, by adding this parameter, you're making this wildcard search here case sensitive. So if I run this here, and as you can see here, that it still matches hello world. But if I run this statement here with the case sensitive one parameter, and you can see here, it ran nothing because it didn't match anything. So this is a really useful feature of the switch statement in PowerShell, is that you can use parameters like this for wildcards and case sensitive if you want your case choices here to be case sensitive. By default, PowerShell is not case sensitive. For example, here, hello, this would match the hello word here. This syntax would be very complicated to do in other programming languages, but PowerShell makes it very easy for you to use parameters for the switch statement here. And this is one of the features I like about PowerShell.